Amazon's Mass Effect TV show is happening, and as expected, everyone is taking the news rationally. I for one don't care what they do with it just as long as it's good, and ultimately I'm just excited to have new Mass Effect content to speculate on. I'm simple like that. So let's speculate. I've already outlined what I think the most likely possibilities will be. You can check that out by clicking the link here. Once you've done that, come on back and we will explore one of these possibilities further. We've discussed this topic ad nauseum on this channel, you've guessed it. These are my thoughts on how Amazon's Mass Effect could adapt the First Contact War. Greetings Spacefarers, I'm Michael, and yes, we're going to talk about the Mass Effect TV series again. It weighs quite heavily on my mind, and if I don't get these thoughts out, I'll likely have a nervous breakdown. So let's get to it. The First Contact War was an inciting incident brought on by the Citadel Council's draconian policies regarding dormant mass relay activation. That, and an unsuspecting spacefaring humanity attempting to, go figure, activate a dormant mass relay. I have a couple of videos on the channel that break down the details of the war. Feel free to go check those out if you haven't already. Otherwise, I'm going to mostly concentrate on my pitch for a First Contact War series and how I feel like it could play out. First and foremost, I would like to just make it clear that I don't think the First Contact War could sustain an entire series. But what it could do is very effectively introduce us to the ideas and concepts of Mass Effect. Therefore, in my pitch for the Mass Effect series, the First Contact War would only last for a single season. Act 1 of the season would focus on introducing us to our protagonist and supporting characters, and I do think that original characters are necessary. Legacy characters will absolutely have a place in this show, but more on that later. The natural decision would be to introduce an ensemble of Alliance military personnel stationed aboard one of the many ships in the flotilla heading to Relay 314. We would have a captain, their XO, even a medical officer akin to Dr. Chakwas, but the protagonists, in the spirit of the gameplay of Mass Effect, would be members of one of the ship's special forces fire teams. In fact, I would go so far as to make our top build character an N7. That branding is just too important to not include. And in the lore, the N7 program has actually just recently been established, with David Anderson being one of the first recruits. Already we have a nice connection to a legacy character. Anyway, as we spend the majority of the pilot getting to know the Alliance, getting to know these crew members, the ever-looming prospect of reaching Relay 314 dominates the narrative. Some of the crew are excited, some of the crew are apprehensive. Nonetheless, the main focus here should be a building tension towards this event. It would make sense to establish that the Alliance operates with a doctrine of seeking and activating relays, whilst hinting at the idea that some amongst the Alliance do believe that this aggressive expansionist behaviour is reckless. Our lead character, meanwhile, would not partake in any of this. They're a soldier. Their job is to follow orders, not question them. I would like to see these characters develop as the reality of the galaxy at large unfolds to them. Juxtaposed with the absurdity of the First Contact War, it could make way for some interesting and compelling conflicts. For instance, it would be interesting if the XO of this ship were to be anti-expansionist whilst the captain was pro-expansionist. Get some real Crimson Tide stuff going on. And of course, it wouldn't be Mass Effect without some romance. And yes, even this early on, I do believe that we should establish romantic involvement with at least two characters. And this should be a good foundation, as alas, First Contact must happen before the end of this pilot. So upon arrival at Relay 314, the Special Forces fire team led by our N7 protagonist will be tasked with escort duty of the scientists in charge of activating the relay. Now, with all of the pieces in place, we have to present them with a problem. But before we get to the obvious, this would be an excellent opportunity to introduce an element of the lore. As it turns out, this particular activation doesn't appear to go as planned. Every mass relay the Alliance had discovered thus far had seemingly powered up merely by their presence, and no further processes were any more complicated than simply flipping a switch. It isn't written anywhere that this actually happens, but it would be a good way of expositing that we actually have no idea how any of this technology works. It also doubles up as a fake-out for the true problem that the Alliance is about to encounter, as just as they think they've solved the problem, the comms begin to go haywire. Chaos appears to be spreading through the Alliance flotilla and no one seems to know why. With no response from any of the ships in the flotilla, our N7 protagonist goes in search of answers. They head back to the shuttle and upon arrival are faced with a terrifying sight. The fleet are under attack by an unknown alien aggressor. And that's where I think the pilot should end. The rest of the season really writes itself. In the established canon, only one ship survives this attack, and it absolutely should not be the ship we just spent the entire pilot getting to know. That ship, along with all hands on board who were not part of the relay activation team, was destroyed. Think along the lines of the Canterbury from The Expanse, lending extra plausibility to our main characters and the survivors having an extreme hatred towards the Turians. After a short skirmish aboard the relay, our heroes and any surviving scientists would eventually escape, making it to the safety of the only Alliance vessel to successfully retreat. As the season progresses, we can be introduced to Arcturus Station, the capital of the Alliance. If we were to have Anderson or Hackett as main characters in this show, this is where they would be, providing us with a POV for this location. Any political elements of the show would be handled from this B-plot. This is where other legacy characters such as Castany Drisha and John Grissom would appear, both of whom had significant involvement in the First Contact War. Another plotline that would have to be addressed would be that of Shanxi. It's from here where the first counterattack is launched, and ultimately where the survivors and our protagonists would end up. The drama would be relatively back and forth, constantly escalating, with each Alliance retaliation being met with an increasing show of force from the Turians, until at the midpoint of the season the worst case scenario happens. The Alliance are defeated, and Shanxi is occupied. At this point, there are even more legacy characters who can be introduced. General Williams, for instance, who most Mass Effect fans will know as the only human to ever surrender to an occupying alien force. That, and he's also Ashley's grandfather, would absolutely have to be included here. And even the Turians, who I believe would need to remain as the antagonists at this point, would begin to have sympathetic characters of their own introduced. And who better than Nihilus and Saren? They would be young, yes, but they also would be in the Turian military at the time, and it's just a suggestion. We could just as easily have original characters. Either way, this would begin the ticking clock phase of the season, as for established fans of the Mass Effect series would start to notice a suspicious absence from a particular council of galactic rulers, which in this case would be an important plot point, as it becomes clearer that the Turians are more interested in subjugating humanity than pursuing peace. This is something that was only ever inferred in the Mass Effect Codex, but it brings me to one of the biggest problems with adapting the First Contact War, and that's there was seemingly no reason for the escalation. And for the premise to not look ridiculous to a casual viewer, we will need a plausible explanation for this. And so at some point, our main protagonists, who are now part of the resistance on Shanxi, in a brave effort to uncover intelligence, come across the Turians' sinister plans for the Alliance. It would also be kind of cool if this is how they learned about the existence of the Citadel Council. A little dramatic irony is never a bad idea, and it makes the Alliance's plight just that much more desperate. They have no idea that the Citadel Council isn't behind all of this. Someone has to make it to Arcturus and call for aid. Side note, this would be a good opportunity to include the character of Thaddeus Ahern, who in the lore is involved in a successful intelligence operation. But ultimately, it must be our N7 protagonist who is the one to bring news of the urgency of the war to Arcturus. Speaking of that, as we go back and forth between the A-plot and the B-plot, we do learn that the Alliance brass hasn't necessarily been complacent, only that when the truth behind the Turians' intentions is revealed, the time to act has come. Shanxi must be liberated. And how cool would it be that if all this time alongside the A-plot, Anderson's story has been to train a second generation of N7s. This would begin the final act of the season, culminating in an epic battle to defeat the occupation, giving our heroes and the Alliance a climactic victory, leaving the audience on a cliffhanger, as the humans and the Turians prepare for full-scale galactic war. And that's just my outline for how I see it playing out. Could it last for more than one season? Yes. Should it? Not necessarily, but what I hope I have illustrated successfully is just how easily the premise of the First Contact War lends itself as an introduction to the Mass Effect universe, and probably why it's such a popular fan choice as a canon event to adapt. Because even though it's true that whilst there's not a lot of information about the First Contact War, there's so much that you could dig out of what little there is. I didn't even scratch the surface of what I would do if it was me writing the script, but I do think there's at least 10 episodes of material to be found amidst the outline that I just detailed. And if this was to just take place over the course of the first season, then we could follow these characters all the way up to the end of the Reaper invasion, without so much as breathing on the legacy of Commander Shepard. And I already said I have no problems with adapting the trilogy, but I do agree, we don't have to. Thanks for watching. If you like what you see, go ahead and give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. If you want to learn more about the First Contact War, click one of these videos right here. Keeler Salai, my friends, and until next time.
I should go.